our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
Now we turn to the Gospel of John, reading from chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they all sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Once upon a time, a weary traveler entered a small village carrying nothing more than an empty cooking pot and a large spoon. He began going door to door, asking the residents if they had any food to share. Some people didn't even answer the door out of suspicion and fear. Others said a simple no and shut the door. Still others said they were sorry, but they only had enough for their own family. So the traveler went to the center of the town. He gathered some wood and started a fire. He filled his cooking pot with water and carefully placed a stone about the size of a large potato in the water. As the water began to heat and steam was rising from the pot, the traveler began to stir. Then he would stop and lean towards the pot, close his eyes, and smell. He smiled, nodded, then continued to stir. Meanwhile, several of the townspeople were peeking out of their windows, wondering what on earth he was doing. Finally, one of them gathered the courage to go and ask. "Oh, I'm making stone soup," he answered happily. You're welcome to join me for supper if you like." "Thank you," answered the villager, "but let me go and get an onion to add to your soup. I think it will enhance the flavor." Soon other neighbors began to bring items to add to the soup: carrots, potatoes, cabbage, tomatoes, corn, beans. Even a little meat was added. I imagine you've heard this story before, or some version of it, but it is a favorite of mine. It's so beautiful, so simple. An entire village was struggling to feed themselves and their families, but by coming together and making a small donation to the soup, they all enjoyed a hearty and nutritious meal, along with joyful fellowship among their neighbors. And they all learned a lesson that we too often forget. Another favorite story of mine is the one we read today from the Gospel of John, known as the feeding of the 5,000. Did you know that there are 6 versions of this story in the Gospels? Only 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but 6 accounts of Jesus feeding the multitudes. The only differences in these stories are the numbers. Sometimes it's 5,000 people, sometimes 4,000, sometimes 5,000 men, not including women and children. Sometimes there are 7 loaves of bread available, sometimes 5, 2 fish, or a few fish, or no fish, 12 baskets of leftovers, 7 baskets of leftovers. But out of those 6 stories, I chose the story from John today because it has one extra detail that none of the others have. One of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" No, it wasn't nearly enough. In fact, I can imagine some of the adults connected with this boy, discouraging him from sharing. But one little boy, a child, was willing to share what he had. And then, who knows what happened? Maybe there were others who witnessed this generosity and decided that they could share something as well. And so on, and so on. Maybe this was the real miracle that happened that day. People were inspired to share, first by the teachings of Jesus, and then by seeing it in action. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't deny that Jesus, the Son of God, had the power to do great miracles. He did, and he does. I'm only reminding us that Jesus doesn't work alone. Jesus empowers. In the feeding story from the Gospel of Luke, when the disciples urge Jesus to send the crowd away because there's not enough food, Jesus answers, "You give them something to eat." Jesus empowered them. We are seeing the same story play out right now in Asheville, North Carolina, and surrounding areas, which have been devastated by flooding due to Hurricane Helene. I heard a story on the news about a group from Georgia who drove 5 hours and brought all the equipment and supplies they needed to feed thousands of people. Suddenly, there is enough. Suddenly, the cost of groceries is a non-issue. Suddenly, people are working together and sharing with others and showing love and compassion without regard to politics, religion, race, or gender identity. Friends, this is the real miracle. As the anchor woman commented, we are at our best when circumstances are at their worst. However, let's not forget that there are also thousands of innocent people in Gaza who are starving because some people believe that to feed them is to side with the enemy. On the soil where Jesus walked, this is shameful. I don't know who coined the word hangry, but I think it's brilliant. We've all heard an infant's cry grow louder and more insistent when they're hungry. We've all seen toddlers having tantrums or meltdowns, but we don't always realize that it could well be a result of hunger. And I know some of this World Communion Sunday, may we come to the Lord's table to be strengthened and nourished by his body and blood. May we